Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll start my presentation. Good morning. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Today I'll present about my internship experience at MPROP and how I overview MPROP report and opportunities for improvement. So these are the contents for today's presentation. Firstly, I'll discuss about the report in general, and I'll be discussing this based on the demo report that's given to me. And then I'll compare it with other reports of as benchmarks to improve our own report, and also I'll end it with the acknowledgement. And moving on, I'll be discussing about the report. So for my internship, I learned that MPROP is a company that focuses on multi-omics analysis to analyze individual metabolomic profile and also predict disease risk and give personalized nutrition recommendation based on them. And I find it impressive that through metabolomics, we can predict various disease risks and explain it in the report. And I think it's important to discuss different types of disease in the report itself because different types of disease has the same underlying mechanisms such as inflammation or metabolic dysfunction. And by assessing multiple risks together, we can provide a holistic view of the individual's health, which help which helps to identify different pathways and also support early personalized interventions. And another feature that I think is important is the trend tracking, where it allows the user who already did the task in the past to compare their current condition to the previous conditions to observe any changes over time. And the report also shows different risk level indicators, which helps the user to quickly understand whether their condition is improving or worsening or stabilizing. And in the beginning of the report, I also noticed the that it shows an overview of the patient's result in a clear and intuitive, visually engaging way, which is easier to understand. And the comparison between the biological age and chronological age is understandable and easy to interpret. And it also uses a linear graph with different colors, which allows the readers to quickly interpret their position in the risk on goals. And I think altogether, these elements sets a clear expectation and helps the client to understand what to look for as they read the rest of the report. And moving on, I'll be discussing about things that can be improved, in my opinion, for the report. And one of the major problem I noticed is the report's readability and length, because the report itself is consists of 98 pages in total, and I noticed that the explanation is mostly in the form of dense text, which may be overwhelming and difficult for general readers without scientific background to read. I think we can try to improve this part by turning this dense explanation into a more visually engaging infographic. And we can also use the help of AI to do that. And I try to also give an example using AI where I designed the explanation for cerebral stroke into an infographic format. I think it's easier to understand because it doesn't use that many words. It minimizes the amount of words that's being used, and it also uses different types of icon, which makes the report more engaging to read. And the report itself also uses different types of figures to give us visualization. However, I noticed that some of the figures are difficult to interpret. And currently, I think the lack of context in this section makes it difficult to understand, especially for users without any scientific background. For example, this report provides a prediction on the biological age and the trend, but it doesn't really explain how the trend is interpreted. And there's also a heat map that shows which pathways are important with the disease prediction, but there's also a lack of explanation, and the figure itself is quite difficult to understand, in my opinion. And to improve this section, I think for the heat map, it would be beneficial to give a legend on that explains how what different color means, and also explain why each of these pathway is important to the disease prediction. And I also noticed that all of the disease prediction uses this type of figure where there's a regulatory direction and expression changes. And I think it is also quite difficult to understand, even though that there's a legend that explains what the regulatory direction means. But it doesn't really explain how the expression changes mean and correlate to the regulatory direction. And to improve this section, I think it's also important to put a short description paragraph that explains the section in general so that it will be easier for the readers to interpret. And the beginning of the report also shows the nutritional recommendation and also the disease risk management. As for the personalized nutrition recommendation, I think that it's good that it's already separated into several categories such as diet, exercise, supplementation, and also lifestyle recommendation so that it's easier for the readers to locate what recommendation, which recommendation is which. But it is also presented in a text form, which I think it's difficult and overwhelming to read. And the section also says that this is an analysis of the test result. But then I noticed that the personalized recommendation itself doesn't specifically mention if the recommendation is important to improve a certain disease or metabolic level. For example, uh, it mentioned here that the consumer should prioritize food rich in vitamin C and folate, but then it doesn't really explain if it can improve a certain disease or not. And I think it would be beneficial if we also give like an example of the food that can be consumed. For example, we can give them options on vitamin C rich food and also the amount that is contained in them so that the participants have options on what to choose. And I also tried to use the help of AI to redesign this section into a more visually engaging way. Yeah, it's similar because I also separate them into categories, but then I also use different type of icons, and I also separate the nutritional target by explaining what the weight management target and also other examples on the food and on the fruits and vegetables that they can consume. And in from this internship, I also get a chance to take part in the experiment to analyze the patient sample. And I also learned about the participant personal data that are collected. And I noticed that the participants are not required to fast before the analysis. And if we didn't collect any information regarding the last meal or medicine intake, I think it could influence the result interpretation as these things can also influence the metabolic profile. So I also did some research and I noticed that in the fat state, the metabolomic pathways are dominated with insulin glucose signaling, phospholipid metabolism, and also protein-induced mTOR activation, which primarily affects the dietary intake and doesn't really represent a long-term metabolic health because in the fat state, especially like from 0 to 4 hours after eating, the metabolism is still influenced by the food as they're still trying to digest and absorb the nutrient, which influences their metabolite level. And therefore, a minimum fasting duration of 10 to 12 hours is required to obtain the most reliable basal metabolic baseline because the metabolite has already stabilized by then and the body is not trying to like absorb the nutrients anymore. And this is also similar when it is mentioned that in the fat state, especially 0 till 4 hours after eating, the metabolism is dominated with elevated insulin and glucose level, and also circulating lipids and amino acid, which mainly reflects the recent food intake rather than a long-term metabolic status. And between 4 till 8 hours after eating, the body also enters a transitional phase where the residual dietary effects still persist. But then after 12 hours of after eating, meaning that 12 hours of fasting, this shows a more stable metabolite and uh, biologically meaningful metabolite level because it's already stabilized, which shows a clear metabolite baseline of the participant. And these are the other reports that I found that can be uh, beneficial if we implement this to our own report. So this is the report from functional medicine, and they also try to explain the metabolite that they analyze into mapping. And I think by explaining the metabolite into mapping, it can improve the user engagement and it will be easier to understand compared by using a dense paragraph to explain them. And I also tried to redesign metabolite pathway explanation in our own report using AI. So this is the metabolite from aging and anti-aging using glycosylate and decarboxylate metabolism. And I used Google Gemini to redesign this metabolism into a pathway, and also they explain if this metabolism dysregulation can affect the aging. And this is also the part that I found in the overview where it highlights the metabolite that are improving and also the metabolite that needs to be paid attention to. And I think this part is quite difficult to understand because it doesn't really explain how this metabolite upregulation affects the disease risk. And I think they can also redesign this into a more visually engaging way so that it's easier to understand for the participants. And this is also another recommendation that I found from other report. And in this report, they mainly use the same format, which is this figures and table to explain their metabolite risk. And they also put this in the beginning of the report to help the clients interpret their disease risk so that they can interpret the table on their own. Because these tables keep appearing in the report so that it's easier for them to understand. And this is also another recommendation that I found in this report. And I think that their explanation is visually engaging because it doesn't use as many words, and they also use a lot of icons, which makes it more interesting to read, especially for the nutritional recommendation. And for the nutritional recommendation, they also provide different types of example of food that can be consumed, so that the participant know if can have options on can have an idea on what food they can consume to improve their vitamin B6 level. And to improve our report, I think we can also leverage the use of AI. And I'll be explaining about Google Anti-Gravity and Google AI Studio, which I think is beneficial in improving this report. I think the anti-gravity can help to with the report interpretation because it can automatically interpret the report content and generate a logical workflow. And it can also create a flowchart-based decision pathway to help the pathway mapping and also guide the user to understand them. And based on this workflow, so Google Integrity will be focused on how to explain the patterns and also the metabolic mapping. And then we can also use Google AI Studio to create a custom animation or redesign the report into a more visually engaging way. And other than that, I think we can also do other collaboration with the other company, for example, because Emperor focuses on the disease risk and they also provide a nutritional recommendation. I'm taking example from ceramide because ceramide is correlated with cardiovascular disease risk, and one of the methods to reduce ceramide accumulation and cardiovascular disease risk is by consuming food that is high in unsaturated fat such as omega-3 fatty acid, because omega-3 can help to reduce the LDL and ceramide accumulation, which stabilizes the lipid metabolism. And instead of by just mentioning to the participant that they need to increase their unsaturated fat consumption, I think the company can also try to collaborate with other company that creates this omega-3 supplementation so that they can have more profit and teamwork, or they can also try to create their own products so that they can sell their more products to the consumer. And lastly, I'd like to thank Ampo for giving me this opportunity. And this is actually my first time working and interning in an industry, so it has been really eye opening for me, and I learned a lot from this internship, especially in the laboratory where you guide me throughout the HPLC and other experiments. And I would like to thank you for explaining me everything because I tend to have a lot of questions, and thank you for being patient with me and explain all things that I ask. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Janice, it's a kind word. You have made a very insightful observation, especially for me, especially for the AI workflow optimization. I think that is so important in the future. Thank you. And I have some question for you, okay? Especially in the context of fasting-based testing, how can we strike a balance between scientific evidence and the real-world practice? What's your opinion? Because you know fasting-based testing is very important according to the evidence, right?
Yes.
And but for the customer, it's not easy to tell them you need to fasting for maybe 6 to 8 hours and then do the test. But that definitely influence our result, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think? Um, is that just that maybe we can depend on different kind of test to adjust the fasting time, or we need to strict um, the fasting time. What do you think?
I think fasting is still important to obtain a stabilized metabolic result because if we eat something, if we eat food or drinks or also medication right before the analysis, I think it could really influence the metabolic level because our body is still trying to digest and also absorb the food, which doesn't really represent the metabolic baseline of the participant. So I think no matter what the test, the fasting is still important.
Okay, so according to the literature review, you think the fasting status is very important, especially for our metabolomic study, right?
Yes.
Okay, and the second question is, do you think personalized nutrition is a trend for the future, or we just give them a general information for the general population? And another one is, do you have you ever seen that the similar development in Indonesia as well?
I think personalized nutrition is a trend that will grow over time because I think nowadays people are more aware of what they're consume, or what they consume, and they're also more aware about their health, and they definitely are interested to change their lifestyle to improve their health outcomes. And in Indonesia itself, I think this trend is not really popular yet because some of the population are still not aware about this and they try to follow the generalized recommendation. But I think personalized recommendation is still important because individual has uh there are varieties in individuals and individuals have like different ways to respond to diet. So that's why it's important to have a personalized recommendation so that it can efficiently affect the individuals instead of a generalized one.
Okay, so there is a huge market gap in your country, maybe,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
yeah, if but diagnosis is so expensive, is kind of. So I think maybe we need a good story to package it all the commercialized product, because sometimes people only think about the price, not the health itself.
Yeah.
So I think a story for sales is very important. Maybe we just let this to improve to let them know how to optimize that. Okay. And the third question is, what do you think you learn the most from the internship?
I especially learned a lot about HPLC. I already have a course in my university about HPLC, but then it's not really deep. And from this internship, I really deepened my skills in HPLC and I learned about the troubleshooting as well. And other than that, I also asked them a lot of questions that I don't understand, and they have been really patient to answer all of those questions. And I really learned a lot about how AI is used in this field because I never really thought that we can use AI to analyze a large amount of data, and I think it's quite eye-opening for me. Yeah, so from this internship, I've learned a lot about the experimentation as well as the disease prediction using AI.
Okay. So basically, I think you need to thanks Gary and Max.
Yeah,
They do a lot.
thank
Okay,
you.
and I also think they learn a lot of English practice conversation. Okay, so in conclusion, Jenny's presentation, your presentation demonstrate a clear understanding of personalized nutrition as a future-oriented field. Okay, emphasizing the importance of integrating scientific evidence and the practical application. Okay, so we sincerely appreciate Improv's contribution to fasting, internship, and learning and offer an environment that bridge research innovation with real-world impact. Okay, thank you everyone for participation. Thank you, Janice, to come to Taiwan. I hope you enjoy here and
Thank you.
have a great